Okay, I think we're good to go. And again, thank you for attending. If you have any questions, please use the chat box. I won't be monitoring the Q&A at all, just because it's too many things to focus on at one time. But use the chat box and I'll try to respond to questions and keep an eye on chat as we go through. So let's begin with the background of this webinar here today. What we're going to see is that a lot of the problems that we face in communities are challenges that either other people have solved or maybe challenges that haven't been solved before, but there's methodologies that you can use from a variety of different disciplines to solve it for your situation. But before I go there, let me ask you a question. How many of you have difficulty explaining what you do for a living? Like, I'm just curious if you can put in chat for a second. How do you tell your parents or your friends, what do you do for a living? I'm curious what everyone says here. What do you say? Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. Innovation integrator, that's going to be a hard sell, I think. I'm very curious about the words that you use to describe what you do for a living. Community architect, next door. Some of these answers are great. Get customers to talk to each other, brand experiences, interesting. So I've had this challenge as well, but I think my challenge when I'm trying to explain to people what I do for a living is more difficult than most of you. Because most of you are either managing a community or you're doing the technology. When I try and tell someone what I do for a living, they ask, so you manage the community? I'm like, well, no, I don't quite manage the community. And then they say, oh, so you do the technology? I'm like, no, I don't do the technology. It's more like I help companies develop their communities. And they look at me kind of like I'm an idiot. Until a couple of weeks ago when I was on vacation, I described how I help companies achieve their goals and solve the challenges that they have. And they responded like Mr. Wolf in Pulp Fiction. And I was like, that is the absolute best description I possibly could have had. Oh, give me 1 second. My slides aren't changing. Yeah, cool. That is absolute the best, the understanding and description. And I love it so much. So now that's what I'm going to use, that I solve community problems. And the reason I'm going about this is I think a lot of organizations, they have the same challenges over and over again. And a lot of organizations are solving them in completely the wrong way, which means a lot of organizations spend so much time and so much money and so much energy not solving the right issues. And very often when companies describe what they're trying to do and the actions that they're taking to try and do those things, we notice a mismatch. And it's not because companies don't want to get it right. It's that there's a methodology that's lacking. Here's another question for all of you here. What are you working on right now? Like, what's the biggest challenge that you're working on today? What are the activities or the programs that you're working on? You can quickly put your answer in chat. Some of these answers are amazing, by the way. Spinning up a consultancy, community language expansion, more volunteers, growing an ambassador program, launching a super user program, growing events, training community leaders, community roadmap, switching local groups. So it's amazing, right, that even without knowing what you were going to say, I felt like I did a pretty good job of predicting what most of these answers are going to be. And my question to you is, are you sure that these things are solving the challenge that you want to solve? And what I'm going to do with the rest of this session today is help you take a data-driven approach, because it's FeverBee, we're all about the data approach, but a data-driven approach to solving the challenges, the right challenges in your community. And this begins with data. What do you do with all the data you have access to? One of the challenges I think we have is that everything in a community is tracked somewhere. Like, there's a record of it somewhere. If you get the raw server logs, every single thing is recorded, which means for many of us, we have so much data, we don't even know what to do with it. Many people, when they are presented with data about a community, is that they start diving into it and looking for things that are interesting. And the issue with looking for things that are interesting is that you're going to find things that are interesting. You're going to find outlier results. You're going to find things that don't quite make sense. And you can spend weeks, days of your life finding interesting things that don't actually help you get to where you want to go. And so what I want to do is to change the way we approach our data Because the mistake that we're making over and over again today is this, which is first we collect the data and then we interpret the data. First, we collect the data and then we interpret the data. And the challenge to this is that we can all look at the same data and come to different conclusions about it because we don't have the right model in the first place. And what we've been trying to do, and the way I've been training the consultants on the FeverBee team as well, is to think about this a different way, which is we flip this, which is first we interpret the data and then we collect it, which means first we have a framework of what we're going to do with the data that we collect that will drive the decisions, and then we collect it. So then there's no ambiguity. There's no ambiguity about what the data means. And that's what we're going to tackle first, which is what does a framework like this really look like? What are some of the frameworks that you can apply today to get much better value out of your data? Let's begin with another question for you all. What do you do with your data today? You can quickly put your answer in chat. What do you do with your data today? Crystal, thanks for that. That's great. So Bridget has a dashboard, show the value of a community, create action plans to engage. So Beatrice, I think I'm saying that right. Like, what do you do? Like, what do you do with the action plan? How are you connecting the data to the action plans? A lot of people send it up the ladder. Interesting. Grow our revenue, it's a deck, client reports and KPIs, understand who's in our community, track towards OKRs, identify areas that are struggling, track progress towards goals. Yeah, this is a pretty show correlation between community engagement and case reduction. That's actually quite a good one, actually. Inez, despair because of the difficulty to bridge the gap between community user data and product user data. Yeah, I feel your pain. Malcolm, experiment with different events and repeat things that get notable activity. Okay, so here's what I'm seeing, and this is very, very common, is that a lot of you track things and then you report on it, usually to your boss, a stakeholder, or someone else that's important. And then they will probably combine that with other reports and send that up the ladder. But what very few people are doing is using that data to make their community better. We collect it and we send reports, but rarely are we using that data to make our community better. And so the first task is to use data to decide what our strategic approach is. When we talk about community strategy, there's a lot of information and advice out there, but I always feel a lot of it is missing that data component. Like, what does the data tell you to do? How do you know what kind of strategic approach you should be following? And very often strategy is, we want to achieve this goal, these are the objectives, and these are the things we're going to do to achieve that. But that's not data-driven. So let me explain a framework that we use when we think about data and the kinds of questions that we're trying to answer. And this, by the way, is why we collect data in the first place. We collect data to make better decisions. So the framework we use, and if you've been following me for a while, you know I've shared this a couple of times before, is the first thing we look at for a community is it successful or not? And we can use a health score for that. We can use a community impact score for that. But whatever metric we're using, the first thing we look at is the community successful or not? Because if it's not successful, you should be taking a very different strategic approach than if a community is successful. But the challenge of this is that you can have a community that's very successful, but the situation is changing. Maybe your audience are all using a new platform, or maybe the goals of the organization have changed, in which case your approach also has to be different. There's a completely different strategic approach that you should be taking if the environment is stable compared to whether it's unstable. Does that make sense? And so when we think about this, if your community is successful, according to your health or your impact scores, and you're in a stable environment, the right strategic approach for you is to optimize what you're doing. This is where benchmarking is really useful because you can see what is working, what's not working, and where you should go next. We spend a lot of time with clients each year, some that we've been working with for years, to optimize their community each year and improve it and improve it and improve it because they're in a stable environment and they're successful. However, if your community is successful, but the environment is changing, then you need to adapt. And this usually means a change in technology. It might mean a change in goals. It might mean a change in the target audience. It'll be usually a big change that you need to adapt to. But then if your community is unsuccessful, but the environment is stable, your strategic approach should be to repair what's wrong. This is where you look to see what is the cause of what's wrong and how do you fix that. And finally, if the community is not successful and if the environment is not stable, this is where you have to revamp everything. This is usually a big, big change that you have to make. And this is usually one of the most difficult projects to implement. So the first questions that we try to answer with data is to figure out, is the community successful or not? And is the environment stable or not? Does that make sense? And so what I'm keen to change in our approach to data is not let's collect it and then see what's interesting, but to prime us all with questions that we go into the data trying to answer. Is everyone still with me here? Let's do a quick yes or no. I think so. Everyone's good. Awesome. Okay. So we can go a lot deeper into what this actually means. So first, how do we know if a community is successful or not? This is where we can get really deep into the measurements, what's worth measuring, what's not worth measuring. And there's a huge number of different metrics that we can track. And honestly, it's different for every organization. So I'm not going to prescribe you should track this or that. But I do think that there's a process that you can go through here to find that North Star metric. And I think we should all have at least one North Star metric that determines the success of the community. I think there's a process we often try to guide our clients through, which is first, is a precise dollar value expected? The approach you take if you are expecting a dollar value return, and that's what you have to show, is completely different from where if you just need to show the impact. If a precise dollar value is expected, the next question is, can you run a controlled experiment? And by the way, we've done this once or twice before. It takes a huge amount of time, it takes a huge amount of money, and often the results aren't as definitive as what the organizations want them to be. So typically here, the answer is no. And this is where we start looking at metrics that relate to customer support or new customers or retention. This isn't definitive, but usually we follow a framework from elsewhere and adapt it to a community. And I think we've all seen examples that are like this. If a dollar value is not expected, then we have a lot more flexibility. The next question is, are there existing benchmarks to compare the community against? If there is, then we can go to the far right. Then we can see whether the community's primary goal is customer support, marketing, retention, feedback. And again, we can adopt a similar methodology, not to show if the community is generating an incredible return on investment in a dollar value sense, but to show impact. Generally, I love showing impact because I think that's where a community really has the biggest effect. It does generate ROI, but it's usually many levels removed from that direct value. And finally, if there are not existing benchmarks to compare against, we can go right in the middle and ask, is increasing the level of engagement the goal? In which case there's metrics for that. Or if not, we can design the community-driven impact score. If you attended my talk at CMX last year, you know that there's an MPS style approach you can take to this, where you can design a specific community impact score. So here's a question for you. What's your North Star today? You can follow this or not, but what is your North Star today? Beatrice says MPS. Interesting. How about the rest of you? Percentage of logged in users over a quarter, self-service ratio, interesting. Increased engagement over time. It's honestly such a shame that engagement is used so often because organizations don't take the time to actually figure out what it should be. What else do we have here? Liz, hey Liz, response rate, time to response. If you are trying to find your North Star, this is the kind of process I would recommend. Visitors conversions, a lot of engagement metrics in here. By retention, what are you folks referring to? Retention of community members or customers? So the first thing we're trying to do is figure out what is a North Star in the most precise way possible. And whether that's going in the right or wrong direction, this is usually where stakeholder interviews can reveal if people are satisfied with it or not, and also if the trend line is heading right or wrong. And this will tell you us whether the community is successful or not. The next thing we look at is the environment. What we know is that a community lives within an environment. The results you get at the bottom here, whether it's customer success, support, engagement, whatever metrics, are the result of the community experience layer around it. This is where you have the biggest impact. You generally get to decide what happens in this layer. And a lot of community management is about controlling and improving this kind of layer. But what you can do within the community is also influenced by the organization. What's happening in the organization has a big impact upon the community, and what's happening in the organization is also impacted by the macro environment. So we want to know not just what's happening in the community, whether it's successful or not. What we want to know is what's happening in these two layers here. We want to explore the changes in this layer to know if the environment is stable or not. And there's so many questions that we can ask here to figure out whether the environment is stable or not. You can use a typical pest analysis as shown here in terms of new laws or economical changes or social changes or technological changes. If any of you here are from the technology space, I'm guessing at least 50% of you are, probably more. And obviously there's been huge impacts the last couple of years, and more communities are in an unstable situation than ever. But you can also look at key trends within the community as well, because this will indicate things that reveal what's happening outside of the community. You can look at, are there any particular types of content, categories, or tags that are rising and falling in popularity? You can look at, are there any major changes in where people are coming from? Are the types of users changing? Are there any changes in the types of visitors that you're getting? I shared this slide last year at my CMX talk, but this is a classic example of a major trend that many people aren't even looking at. Using Google Analytics, and we saw where people were coming from, there's a very noticeable trend that more and more people are coming via search. Whether that might have been 60% before, it's now significantly higher, and it seems to be heading further and further in that direction. It's also interesting that email marketing is less effective than before, and social seems to be less effective than before. So we should be orienting our approach and our growth approach towards search and channels like this. I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but when we know what the trends are, we can adapt to align with those trends. And a big part of what I think consulting is aligning with these particular trends. Here's another example from a community. What do you notice about this? Let me open the window for a second. What do you notice about this graph here? If we look at where this community began, clearly there's a huge bias towards the UK and the USA. I think combined, they had around 80 to 90% of the traffic. But what's amazing today is that it's less than 50%. And that's remarkable when you think about it. And it's so easy to overlook these kind of trends if we're not tracking them. So we really want to know what is happening in the environment, because this will determine what kind of strategy we take. So if the environment is changing quite significantly, then we want to adapt to those trends. And a really big part of consulting is making sure that every community that we work with is very much aligned to current trends. Once a community isn't aligned to trends is when a community starts going wrong. So if we can align to those trends, then we have a clear idea of what we're going to be doing. So now we can look at what's happening in community and what's not, and select the right strategic approach. Now, obviously, if you have multiple online communities or different groups, you might have different groups in different parts of this. But you can see if you're trying to optimize, this is where benchmarking and performance works. This is where using the 80-20 rule works. This is where doubling down on your competitive advantages really, really works. If you're adapting, then you can bring the community into line with stakeholder needs, technology trends, social trends, these kind of things. We'll talk about repair later, but this is getting a data-driven approach into what's working or not, and then revamping the community. So the first thing we always do is to know what we want at the top level. What is the right strategic approach for our community to take? Okay, hopefully everyone is still with me. And at FeverBee, this is typically what we try to do. We typically try to get an overview of what's happening, and then we can dive deeper into how we achieve each one of these. So next, how do we optimize the community? Let's imagine that we're in a successful community in a relatively stable environment. Well, now the goal is, how do we optimize that? What do we going to measure? Or more importantly, what would you do differently if a metric that you're tracking increases by 10% or decreases by 10%? And let me pose that as a question to you. For one of those metrics that you mentioned before, what would you do differently if it increased by 10% compared to if it decreases by 10%? Take maybe a half a minute, put your answer in chat. I'm losing my voice a bit already, and I don't know why. So we will see RCA, dive into the data to find out why. Check if it's a seasonal trend or not. Interesting. Look for context. Decreases, freaking out. That's a great answer. What we see time and time again is that people dive into solutions before properly diagnosing the problem. And here we can use a very similar approach to what we talked about before, which is whether a metric is going up or down doesn't really tell us much at all. If we're optimizing a community, there are two things that we tend to look at. One is what's critical to stakeholders and what isn't. Qualitative data can do this, but so can the popularity of whatever the item is. And second, we looked at whether the item is high engagement or high growth, or low engagement and declining growth. And based upon this, we can take different approaches. You're probably seeing a similar framework like this before, where if something is rising in popularity and is critical to stakeholders, we want to be making sure that the organization spends as much time as possible in this box, that they're investing more time and resources in these particular things. If something is critical to stakeholders but low engagement or declining, this is where we need to experiment. This is where we need to change what we're doing here. If something is not critical but seems to be working incredibly well, we can stop this, but usually we recommend just keep maintaining what you're doing at the moment. And finally, if something isn't critical, isn't working, stop doing these activities. And this is what we want to be doing. We want to be optimizing our time, because optimizing our time and resources is the first step towards optimizing our community. And when we look at what community teams are doing, they typically spend so much time on activities which don't move the needle, but maybe they personally are passionate about. And I think maybe this is one of the things that a consultant does, is that they take a very unemotional approach to what works and what doesn't. And then we try to adjust things in the right direction. And this kind of framework can be incredibly useful to use if optimizing is the right approach. So what we try to do here is a data analysis to find out how community programs are performing. And I don't want to go too deep into the metrics, because this session today isn't about the metrics, it's about the overall approach. So you can be tracking a whole variety of things and might represent a whole variety of things. A couple of things we do like doing and we get great value from is having a chart like this, breaking down the categories of the community into each section to figure out what's going well and what's not going well. Response rate and average time to first response tend to be very good, along with the accepted solution rate or helpfulness score. And then we can quickly see that some things like product 1 is going pretty well, but the response rate needs to be higher. Product 4 is going well, off topic, doesn't seem to be that useful. Product 2 isn't going well, but probably is important. And we also do this for super users as well. So we can pull data from a community, we can analyze how the super users are performing. And what do you notice about this chart here? The number of replies is at the is on the horizontal axis, and the helpfulness score is on the vertical axis. What would you do with this data here? Take maybe a minute, just put your answer in chat. What do you think? What would you do with this kind of information? Coach super user 6? Interesting. Helpfulness, I mean, I wouldn't worry about what the helpfulness represents, but it's more of a poll as a custom community platform. So I think Justin probably has the right approach here. I know it's always tempting to say, you know, you can coach the worst performers, but I think when people are performing so badly, they're usually doing a lot more harm than good. So it might be a good idea to remove the worst performers, coach those that are just below the level that have the biggest chance to improve, and then invest more resources in the super users that are doing well. And that's what we did. And it looks subtle, but if you were tracking the overall satisfaction score of this community, you can see a drastic improvement as a result of this. And so by tracking this kind of data, you can get great insights for these kind of things. And so usually we take all of the tactics and all the things we learn about a community and we put it into a framework that's like this, where super user 11 is absolutely crushing it. So we definitely want to invest more time and resources into him or her. Product 1 questions going well, we want to invest more resources. Visitors from mobile search devices are going well, let's invest more in that. Optimizing content for search is important according to the trend, so let's invest more in that. And then we can see the things that we want to experiment with, the things that we want to fix. We can see the things we want to maintain. And then we can also see the things that we want to maybe stop doing. It's clear that announcements aren't popular and take time, so do AMAs, off-topic discussions, gamification. And now what we've done is taken all of the activities the community team is doing and try to figure out what they should stop doing, what they should keep doing, and what they should change. And when you have a framework like this, it's easy, or not easy, but it's easier to optimize the community and significantly improve the performance. Because now you're prioritizing the right things and you're investing your resources in the right place. 2 other quick things here. One is that these 2 things have to balance. There's so many strategies I've seen that drive me absolutely crazy because they basically just recommend doing everything. And every community team is restrained by the resources they have. So recommending their community team spends more and more resources doing more and more things isn't a recipe for success. Whenever you want to invest more time or resources in something, that has to come from somewhere. And that's why these 2 things have to balance. If they don't balance, then you're going to be dividing resources into smaller and smaller chunks while hoping for bigger and bigger results. And that's simply not the way to go about it. And with the experiment 1, this is where we get into the root cause analysis. There's a variety of different ways to look at this, but one of the things we do look at, especially for tactics that maybe aren't working, is whether they reach enough people, whether they affect enough change, or whether that change lasts for a long time. But this is the area where you can experiment, learn from best practices, but first to figure out what works and what didn't work. And when you're investing more resources, this is where learning from the best-in-class examples comes from. This way you can see which communities are absolutely incredible and learn as much as possible from them. Okay, everyone's still with me? I think most people are saying yes. Just remember, if you are using the chat, to put your response to everyone and not just me, not to name anyone in particular, but just make sure you got the right option selected there. Awesome. So task 3, the next really useful thing you can do with your data is to solve the right problems using a root cause analysis. How many of you know what this is? Hillary says, we want to hear your brilliance, yo. Thanks. I'm not sure I can support that. But how many of you have done a root cause analysis in the past? Some of you maybe. Awesome. Perfect. So this can be a refresher for some of you. For some of you, it would be a completely different approach. A lot of this comes from the world of management consulting and how the big consulting firms like McKinsey and Accenture and Bain approach some of the challenges their clients have. The first step for any problem you have or any goal you want to achieve is to validate the goal or that problem. Let's say there's a goal, increase views of content by 10%. What metric would you even look at to know if you've achieved it or not? It's very hard to get an answer to that. So the first thing we do is figure out exactly how this is measured. Because what you don't want is a situation where you might achieve something and people have very different opinions. And it's amazing how much people can look at the same data and come to different results. Let's try something interesting. I don't know how well this is going to work, but let's try a poll. This community that you see here, is it growing or shrinking? I don't know if you can see the poll on this slide at the same time. If not, then I might have just broke this. But if you can, I want to know is if this community, is it growing or shrinking or staying the same? What do you think? I'll give you maybe 30 seconds to put your answer to the poll in there. Yeah, you got about another 20 seconds. The results are interesting. So looking at this graph here, hopefully you can still see it. I'm not sure what it looks like on your side, but is the community growing, shrinking, or staying the same? Okay, I think we're good. Let me end the poll and share the results. So what's really fascinating to me is that this is real data from a real community. I've shown it at workshops, I've shown it at events, and I've asked people the same things. And we're all looking at the same data and we're coming to different conclusions. Isn't that kind of remarkable? There seems to be a trend that is staying about the same, which is interesting. Let me just stop sharing this. So the problem is that the question isn't defined well enough, is it? And I don't want to get into like the what metrics matter, post topics, or anything like that. What I mean is that if you track this data from the very beginning, it's growing, right? If you look at it from the very beginning, the data is growing, like Becky's saying. If you look at it just by the last year or since the beginning of the year, it's shrinking. If you look at it over the past year, it's slightly growing. And so it can vary so much because we don't define the question well enough. So when we have a challenge, which is increase the number of views on content by 10%, it's remarkable how many people start coming up with solutions instead of clarifying what the outcome is actually meant to be. And that's why we have to be really precise about our data. Last year, we did a workshop in San Mateo. I don't know if any of you were there, but maybe you were. And we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we define a data question? Like, is our community growing? If you were to take that and turn it into a question that someone can answer, how would you do it? What would be a data question? If you were going to give it to one of your team and say, this is exactly what I want to track, what would that question be? Take maybe 30 seconds, see if you can get an answer to this. Bridget says, need time frame, what is being tracked? Time parameters, yes, but be specific. Actually write out the question if you can. And it says track MAU versus DAU. Number of members, number of posts. Nope, these are too vague. I'll give it another 5 seconds. WE score. Some of them are getting kind of close, but generally the answers aren't that good. Sorry. So a data question is really specific, which is, is the total number of posts over the past 3 months greater this year compared with the same period last year? And this isn't the only answer, but it's an answer that avoids seasonality. It's the answer that avoids all of the other things that can affect the results. And it's an answer that the same person or the same analyst, if they had this question, would all come to the same answer. Whereas, is our community growing? We can all come to different results. With a data question, we should all come to the same answer. Likewise, does our community improve retention? How would you even begin to look at this? Let's try this one, actually. What would be the data question? Does our community improve customer retention? What would be something that you're looking at here? Hillary's answer is actually pretty good for that as well. How would you know if your community improves retention? What would you look at? CLV, Kyle, that's just a term. Like, how would you know if it's moved that? Logins comparison, do people regularly engage in the community? So let me tackle some of these, because I think these are great examples. So what do we have? So Mel says, do people who regularly engage in the community renew membership? the first thing that Mel would have to do is define what regularly means. Is it once a day, once a week, once a month, once a year? What does that mean? What does renew membership mean? Is that an annual thing? So you have to be really precise with the terms. Logins comparisons, sorry, that's too vague. Okay, Christina has a good one. What's the percentage of renewals for community participants versus non-participants? How do you know you're not just measuring your best customers there? I'm not going to go deep into cause and effect. Interesting. Okay, so generally kind of the same results. What we usually find is that coming up with the data question is really difficult. And it's where you have to work through a lot of assumptions and use your own knowledge. But generally, you should be able to come to an answer here. And it's the same with all of the other metrics as well, which is, does our community increase satisfaction? Well, we can look at very specific metrics here. How many support tickets does our community deflect? There's very specific metrics. And so the point is, what tends to happen is that people throw these vague questions out, and you can come to very different answers. What you need to do is to get really, really specific in what the data question is. The next thing we look at is, what are the key drivers of success here? So what influences views of content? What influences this metric? Try and split this into two things. Views of content, if you were to break that down, what would that be? What two things make up that metric? And let's assume this is the number of people that are viewing content posted on the site. Okay, so people are kind of getting there. Yeah, I think Jacinda's really close. So Jacinda has one. Views of content is influenced by the number of people that visit the site. And what's the second thing? It's how many people visit the site and what else? Increasing page views. There we go. So those are the two things, right? It's how much content that people view when they visit, and it's how many people are visiting the community in the first place. And so if you want to increase the number of views of content, these are two completely different approaches. The approach you take when someone has already arrived in a community is very different from getting more people to visit the community. Does that make sense? Okay, I think we're there. And so now we can go a level deeper than this. If we take option 1 here, increase in page views per visit. What are the things that make up this? Well, what we can do here is use what we call the MECE framework. This is very popular in management consulting, is where they create these mutually exclusive but collectively exhaustive options. So in our case, increasing page views of content when people do visit is dependent upon two things. 1, increasing visits to the content that's there already, and 2, giving people more content that they can view. What about visitors? If we're going to create 2 options for increasing the number of visitors to the website, what would they look like? So Ritu, things about bounce rate and time spent, all those things are interesting, but they aren't mutually exclusive. Like page views and the number of visitors, that's definitive, that's exhaustive. Those 2 things are the key metrics that drive this. Christina, yes, you got it completely right. Yes, you can attract new visitors to the community for the first time, or you can get your past visitors to visit more often. And now we can begin to see here is that we have 4 different approaches that we can take here to achieve our goal. And you notice they're 4 very different things, 4 very different approaches that you can take. And so now we have to identify what are the challenges that we need to solve for each of these, and why haven't they been resolved already? So here, increasing visits to existing content, this might be an awareness thing. Maybe people visit the site and they're not aware of how much content is on the site. If it's creating new content for people that are visiting the community, it might be that members have read all the existing information and they need new information. If it's attracting new visitors, it might be that members are unlikely to read more, but there are clear segments, new segments that we can attract to the community. And if it's increasing return visitors, this could be a retention issue. Maybe members keep forgetting about the community or are unaware of its ongoing value. Does this make sense? I just want to make sure. This is definitely one of the more advanced sessions that we've done. I know everyone's at a different level. So strategically, we're not guessing about what's working. We're working through the problem. We begin with the goal and then we're working that goal. And so now we have to come up with, well, we have to figure out which of these problems are we going to try and solve? Which of these problems are we going to try and solve? And if the answer is all of them, as I know some of you are mentioning here, no, that's completely the wrong way of thinking about this. This is where we can figure out what data questions do we use here. So if it's awareness, we might look at, do people that visit a page that has multiple types of content on it visit a lot more content than people who don't? If it's an interest thing, we might look at whether newer articles are more popular than older articles. And you'll be surprised how often they're not. Very often the older articles are so popular that we could just drive more traffic to them instead of creating new ones. If it's increasing the number of visitors, then we might look at, does the ratio of website visitors from the company or customers to community differ for any particular region? For example, if there are, say, 1 million people from India that visit our corporate website each month, but only, say, 10,000 people from India that visit the community each month, we should be like, wow, there's an issue here that we should try and resolve. That's a clear target market that we can do better with. And if it's increasing return visitors, then we can see, is there a lot of fluctuation here? Does it vary from one month to the next? And what can we learn from those different months? But now we're taking a very data-driven approach to figure out what we should do here. And then we can develop the solutions. Notice that this comes at the very end. Very often people want to increase the number of views and they'll create more content, they'll start doing all these things, but they won't resolve the issue itself. Imagine if you're creating a lot of content on your community, but the problem is actually you're not getting enough people to the community in the first place. No one's going to find that. And so I'm not going to go deep into the tactics because I want the session more focused on the strategic side and the data-driven framework side. But obviously, there's a lot of approaches that you can take for each one of these to achieve your goal. And when people say, oh, just do everything, for sure, you can definitely do that if you want, as long as you've got an infinite number of resources. And that should be your response. If your stakeholders say, just do all of these things, ask for more resources, because you can't do any of these things well if you're trying to do all of them at once. It just doesn't work like that. So hopefully this makes sense so far. We'll do another example in just a second. But what we always do with any goal, with any problem, is first break it down. Break that problem down into the different approaches. Make sure it's mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, and then break it down. So you have a very specific, very narrow problem that you can solve, and then you can adapt your approach to which is the best one. And we do this repeatedly with clients, time and time again. We follow this systematic approach in this example with retention to achieve exactly these kinds of goals. And I think one of the reasons maybe why or at least I hope that we have the reputation that we do, is that we take a data-driven approach, we figure out what's working, what's not working, and then we are systematic about the activities that we undertake. So let's try another one. Let's imagine that the number of posts in the community has declined. The first thing we do is find out how this is measured. And let's just say it's a number of posts that are posted each month within the last 30 days, and it's gone down over the last couple of months. What are the two possible causes of this? This is kind of similar to the last one. Let's try and work through it together. If the number of posts is down, or you can invert it if you want the number of posts to go up, what are the two factors that drive this? Give you maybe 30 seconds to answer. So active users is one, definitely. Seasonality, not really where we're going. Catherine, yes, you got the second answer. So two things drive this, right? It's the number of active members you have in the community, or it's the number of posts per active member. Either less people are visiting in the community, or when they do visit, they're posting less. Does this make sense? Like, this is like the critical thing, because once we follow this approach, it's easier to figure out exactly what to focus on. So break that problem down. So now let's go one level below this. If there's a decline in the number of active members in a community, what are some reasons that might have happened? Try and think of two. What are two reasons that could be collectively exhaustive about why that might have happened? I'll give you another 10 seconds. Brittany, I mean, you could be right, but you're jumping ahead. Failed content, decrease in overall customers of product, no longer interested in solving problems. Yeah, most of you are around one level too deep here. So if the number of active members has declined with that, and because the number of posts, there's two things that we look at. Is there a decline in new discussions, or is there a decline in replies? Because this will take you down a completely different path. Is posts per active members declined? We might look at declining in new registrations or declining returning visitors. And then we can see what the potential problems are. If the number of new discussions has declined, that could be because members are unable to post or not as able to post as before, or maybe members have fewer problems to solve. If the number of replies has gone down, it might be that they have less ability to reply to questions or less motivation to reply to questions. Likewise, if registrations has gone down, it could be that fewer newcomers are reaching the community or fewer visitors are converting into active members. I just realized that I switched these just before this session, so it's a bit mixed up. Apologies for that. If decline in returning visitors has gone down, then we might look at the newcomer churn rate or decline in visit frequency. But we always take the option and then we break it down, because this then leads into a very specific data question that we can solve. If members are unable to easily post new questions, we can drill deeper. Are people still posting on that new discussion button as often as they were before? Has the ratio, if members have fewer problems to solve, then this should also show up in the ratio of questions to support tickets. There shouldn't be a major change in that. If there's less ability to reply to questions, that could be because the questions have become more difficult. We could look at whether the average number of views per question has declined. So are people seeing the questions less, or are they less able to respond to them? Likewise, if there's less motivation to reply to questions, it could be the clicks has gone down. But hopefully we get the point. We take the issue, we define it, and then we break it down, and then we develop very specific solutions to that problem. And so it's always tempting to dive in and come up with an answer straight away and to suggest, oh, let's do gamification, or let's do an MVP program, or let's do any of these things. But the right way to do it, and the way I think consultants approach this, or at least the way we approach this, is to break down the problem and figure out exactly what is the challenge that you're trying to solve. What is the very specific issue that you're trying to solve, and then solve that thing. And so data can help guide your entire response here. Let me just do a check before we move on. Is everyone still with me? I know we're a little short on time, so I'll speed up a bit. Okay, hopefully this all makes sense. Yeah, and obviously you can decide whether it's a problem or not, and all this saying, I don't want to go deep into those kind of questions, but yeah. I mean, this is very much something that happens often as well. This is data from a client I think we had last year or the year before. We're looking at the data. It's clear that the number of questions in their community has declined. Well, the very next thing we look at, or let me ask you, what is the next question that you look at here? The number of questions has declined. What might the next question be? One way to think about this is, what is the behavior that people take before they perform that behavior? So what do people do before they ask a question? Search, sort of, but there's something that happens after search and before they ask a question. What they do is that they land on the website. So we want to know if the problem is at the website or if it's the problem with the people themselves. I don't mean that they're in the wrong, but we go deeper. And what we find is that fewer visitors were reaching the community in the first place. What we find is that the number of logins stayed relatively static, but the number of people visiting the client's website goes up and up. So, aha, what's happening here? Take maybe 20 seconds. What would you think is happening here? And at each level, we can go deeper and deeper and deeper. Brittany says, yes, maybe the community link is broken or deprioritized, roadblocks, confusion, login. Yeah, so now you're like, okay, it might not be an issue with the people. It feels like a technical issue. It feels like the ratio has changed. And so we might look at what happened here. Something happened here, which meant a smaller percentage of visitors were reaching the community. And this is causing the community to enter a death spiral. Fewer questions per member, fewer questions per login. So it caused a downward spiral. And then we looked at the support ticket information. What do you notice about this? What does this information tell you? So many tickets? Yeah, I mean, you kind of got the right answer. Yes, who got the answer? Carissa, hey, I'm not sure you participated yet. Yeah, so what's happened is that something suddenly changed, didn't it? Where people began filing support tickets instead of going to the community. And now this feels like it's a technical issue. This feels like something changed at a very specific time. That is a technical issue. And now we can look at precisely what changed. Usually we can go to archive.org, look to see what happened before and after this date by a couple of months, and either revert that or adapt our change accordingly. And this is what we do. This is how we tackle any problem with a root cause analysis. At each level, we just go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it doesn't just work with goals that are data-driven. Even if, say, we have a client that says, hey, we want to migrate to a new community platform, which we've gone through countless times. The first question to always ask is why, right? Like, why do you want to migrate? And then you might find, oh, the platform can't do what we want. Well, let's break this down. And it might be that maybe the platform can't host user meetups and the members are really demanding it. But let's think about this. What are the options here? If a platform can't host user meetups, forget about the data side for a while. What are two options that are available to you here? I'll give you maybe 20 seconds on this one. Integrate with a platform that does. Again, you folks are one level too deep, but the answers are generally okay. So you've got two options, right? You can stay with your platform or move to a new platform. Those are the options. And that also means you can either design a workaround for it. You can work with a vendor to develop a solution. You can migrate to a platform that has the functionality, or you can find a platform that does that thing and try and integrate it in some way. And then you can work through the problem. What's the cost and sustainability of a workaround? Will you be a priority for the vendor if you go down this approach? What is the selection and migration requirements? Is the experience going to be good enough if you integrate with a single purpose platform? And then this takes you down the data questions to ask and so on and so forth. So again, with any challenge you have, you can break it down into a framework like this and then develop the right solutions for you. And so that's what I want to take away from this, is that make sure you're solving the right problem. Because at the moment, a lot of people aren't. At the moment, a lot of people are tackling the wrong thing. And honestly, if you want help, please come to us. We'd love to help you. We've worked with a lot of you that are on this session today, hopefully quite successfully. So please come to, also, we have a new website as well. So please go to FeverBee.com to check that out. And let me just say thank you so much for your time and your questions and your participation. It's been really, really awesome. So thank you so much for that. Hopefully this has been useful. Just let me know if it helped or not. Has this helped? Awesome, thank you. Any questions? I know we don't have too much time, but I don't mind sticking around for a little while. And the rest of you have to go. That's fine too. No judgment here. I will share the recording probably on YouTube. And by the way, you should check out our YouTube channel. We've been doing a community platform wars series, which has been a lot of fun, really diving deep into the different pros and cons of each platform. So if you look up the FeverBee channel on YouTube, you should find some good stuff. Okay, let me just check the questions. So there's a lot of content coming at once and I can't follow it. Justin, thank you for that. Beatrice, do you think a company always have to have a consultancy? I mean, I'm biased. I think consultancy is very useful for certain kinds of organizations. I think you have to be ready for a consultant. You know, like I think you have to be willing to work with a consultant or consultancy, but I'm definitely happy to schedule a call if you want to discuss that. But I don't want this to be too promotional, to be honest. It gets a bit awkward. Brittany, can you make 100 of these root cause analysis slides and publish them in a book? I'd buy that. You might, but you might be the only person that does. I'm sure everyone else has like better stuff to read. But yeah, thank you for your kind comments. Kyle, how's it going, Kyle? You've just started a consultancy, right? I may have missed this, but are you aggregating the data with a third-party tool or something custom? Generally, no. I mean, we did aggregate some of the data, but no, we didn't use a specific tool. We're trying to do a lot more with data pipelines, actually, but that's a long way away. Are you going to share the slides? I probably won't share the slides, but I'll share the recording. How do we get template? That's probably going to be for clients or people that take our training course. What we are going to do in a couple of months is release a training course on this, which is going to be absolutely awesome. I'm really excited about it. We put so much time and effort into it. So I think that should be available around June. So please sign up for that. Hillary, consultants should always hang out in the community manager's back pocket for sure. I'm not sure that's where I'd hang out. I mean, our strategy, honestly, like, is we share what we learn. And if people think we can help them, then we work with them. But we try not to be too promotional. And yes, we'd love to see some research on prevalent personality traits of community managers. It's not the kind of research we do. I think Community Roundtable or maybe CMX might have something on that, but I'm not sure. Ritu, do you have a virtual cohort to teach? In a couple of months. Just let me finish the course. Rex, have you found a useful way to use ChatGPT for communities? I wrote a post on this a couple of weeks ago. Maybe Phoebe can share it in chat if she's still there. Generally, we're just kind of experimenting. No one has, I think, has found a definitive way. I think everyone is just experimenting. So I think there could be some interesting implications. Also, I'll be participating in a webinar next week with Guild, where we talk about AI, but that might not be in a convenient time zone for you, Rex. You're in Seattle, right? I'm trying to skim through the questions. There's just a lot of messages in here. Then yeah, okay, sorry, I didn't realize that was you. Hey. Brittany, we just wrote an epic onboarding campaign that would have taken us hours to draft on our own. We did spend a while drafting a super detailed prompt, so that really is the key. So I'd be really interested to see the data of that. Like, onboarding campaigns are one of those areas where a lot of people spend a lot of time and effort and then they're disappointed by the results. And I can talk about why that is, but yeah, maybe another time. Becky, the CEO has skills well for CMs, but not sure about personality. Yeah, I don't think there is much research on personality. Also, like, personality research, it's often not as valid as how it's presented. It's a nice way of saying it. Bridget, training online options. There's no travel is allowed for my company. Oh, sorry, you said that in private. I apologize. I didn't mean to read that out loud. Yeah, just to answer that, like, we did a workshop last year and it sold okay, but it didn't sell as well as what we wanted to in person, because I think there's just so many people that can't travel now. So this will be an online training course that we're doing. Any other questions? I think we're good. How to do. Okay, I know that we're over time. So let me just say thank you again so much. I really hope that this session has helped. And Jacinda, thank you so much for your kind words, Jacinda Venio. Yeah, thank you so much. It's really been nice to hear that feedback. If you have anything else that you want from us, any ways that we can help you, please do drop us a line. And hopefully we'll see you or speak or to most of you soon. Just FYI, like I'll be speaking in Prague in I think in a couple of months at the Talk-Based event, which I recommend those of you in Europe go to. And then I'll also be at the Community Roundtable in Boston and CMX in the same week, doing workshops there. So hopefully you can attend them. But thank you so much, everyone. And I'll see you all at some point, I'm sure. Bye-bye.